Because of the corona lockdown, I was not able to get my daughter the doll's pram for her birthday as she wanted. But last minute I decided to build one, and I'm gonna show you how. I started this project by breaking down 18mm birch plywood into manageable pieces. When cutting plywood in my driveway, I like to use these rigid foam insulation sheets to lift the plywood off the ground. Back in the shop, I ripped the clean edge on each piece. After setting up my fence, I used this edge against the fence and cut the pieces to width. With the cross-cut fence, I could then saw them to length. All the connecting pieces are cut to size, and it was time to make the sides of the doll's pram. The sides give the pram its look, and hence I wanted them to be close to perfect with sharp and accurate lines. I printed out the design I worked out at the computer on multiple A4 sheets and could tape them up after figuring out how they come together. I placed the template on a piece of 12mm MDF and secured it with tape. Spray adhesive would have been way better, but I forgot to stock up. With the jigsaw, I cut out the template very slowly and carefully. This took some time, but since the template determines the shape of the sides, I didn't rush it. Because I had to saw straight through the tape that secures the paper to the MDF, I had to tape it again. Pro tip: do not saw into your workbench. After removing the paper template, I filed out a few bumps I've created with the jigsaw. Then I placed the MDF template on my plywood and traced the shape of it with a pencil. 2 times. At the table saw, I cut them apart. Note the super cool angle I get from my Instagram with the tripod on the sliding table. At the bandsaw, I roughly cut the sides while making sure I stay close and outside of the lines. For the tight inside curves, I made a bunch of relief cuts first. This saved me the hassle of changing to a smaller bandsaw blade. To secure the MDF template to my plywood blank, I used double-sided tape. With my big flush trim bit, I cleaned up the plywood sides and ended up with 2 perfect copies of each other after removing the template. Spacing the connecting pieces equally apart and parallel to the edges of the sides is not so easy on a rather complex shape. The pieces should be offset by 10mm. Since they are 18mm thick, I get the inside by making a mark parallel to the edge at 28mm. From the intersection of 2 marks, I measured 5mm in each direction and got the corner of the connecting pieces. After repeating it for every connecting piece, I could place them carefully. With the head of my combo square slid up to the corner, I marked the location for the dominoes. Don't worry, you do not need a domino for this project. Although I found it to be the best solution for me to use it in this project, you can go with standard dowels, pocket holes, or just regular screws. It really comes down to what you are comfortable with and which tools you have at your disposal. I used the 5mm bit for 5x30mm dominoes and placed the domino with the base plate right to the marks. Freehand routing the dominoes worked pretty well for me, but you could also clamp a guide in order to make the process more precise and easier. With the fence set for 20mm boards, I routed the slots into the connecting pieces. Of course, I couldn't resist and had to assemble the pram. But getting these dominoes out again isn't effortless. For the handlebar, I used solid oak, so that it has a bit of contrast. At the jointer, I jointed one face and one edge. Then I marked the 2 jointed faces so that I don't get mixed up when resawing. Speaking of resawing, I set my guidepost to the lowest position possible and adjust my fence 2 to 3mm proud of my final thickness. With a sharp blade, a slow feed rate, constant pressure against the fence, and my very fancy scrap piece push sticks, I get a decent result almost every time. Next, I planed the boards to their final thickness of 18 millimeters. At the table saw, I cut the boards to their final dimensions. If you want to build this project yourself, I have a full set of plans for it, including the printable template for the sides on my website. Just follow the link below this video. This is how the three pieces should come together. 2 side pieces and 1 cross piece. I marked their orientation with the cabinet maker's triangle. Creating the bridle joints may seem complex first, but it gets much clearer once you see the finished joint. First, I mark a notch at each end of the cross piece, at 7 millimeters parallel to the bottom edge, and the length with the marking gauge set to the thickness of the side. I took the 90-degree side of my dovetail guide and sawed to my lines. Then I set the 2 cutters of the dual marking gauge to the thickness of the cross piece and locked the setting. On the side piece, I eyeballed center and stroked the lines for the mortise. From my cross piece, I took the distance of how high the mortise had to be. After marking my waist, it looked something like this. I began the mortise by sawing to the lines again with my pull saw. With a chisel and mallet, I removed the majority of the waste and completed it by cleaning out the corners. Test fit looks pretty good. Time to attach the handlebar to the pram. I positioned the sides of the handle parallel to the end of the pram with my combo square. And since the plywood was already sanded, I used tape to mark the position. For the domino location, I used the same process as with the connecting pieces previously. And again, freehand routing into both pieces. There is something to domino joinery that is so satisfying. After inserting my 7mm round over bit and setting up my router fence, I rounded over all edges of the handlebar as well as the other parts. To make it appeal even nicer to children's hand, I sanded everything with 120 and 220 grit. Before I show you how I finished the pram, let me take a second and thank you for watching my video. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I really appreciate your support by subscribing to my channel. Don't worry, it's free and nobody gets hurt. Thanks. Alright, on to the finish. Before applying anything, I taped off the glue areas for later with painter's tape. Then I primed all plywood surfaces. I started with the insides and added dominoes into the slots instead of using painter's pyramids. This way, one side could dry and I could already move on to the next side and to the edges. I made sure the edges get an extra thick coat since they are thirsty. I also applied primer to the wooden parts of the wheels I bought at the hardware store. A water-based lacquer was my choice as a finish, since it is rated for toys and non-toxic once it has dried. My daughter wanted the pram to be blue, so I took a sky blue. A scrap piece with a few dominoes in it was a perfect drying rack. After applying a second coat of lacquer, I peeled off the tape and let the lacquer dry. The next day it was time to glue it up. Usually I'm a bit nervous when it comes to the glue up. But this one was so straightforward that I felt comfortable moving around the camera. The dominoes made it easy and there was not much I could screw up. After adding some clamps, I realized I taped off too much and touched it up with a small brush. I used the drying time of the glue to assemble the wheels again and finish the handlebar. Again, I used tape to keep the glue surfaces free of finish. After letting the finish sit for a solid 5 minutes, I glued the handle to the pram and glued up the bridle joints as well. I came back a few hours later, sanded the joints flush, rounded over the remaining edges and gave it another coat of finish. In order to prevent the doll's pram from racking, I set it on the flat table of my table saw and marked the same relative height of the table with a piece of scrap. On this line I could drill the holes for the screws attaching the wheels. With a M4 screw, a washer and a lock nut I screw the wheels to the base. I was very happy to finish this project on the last day before my daughter's birthday and have a present for her in time. She absolutely likes it and she can take her dolls for a ride now. Don't forget to check out the article on my website, as there are more infos on how to build this pram, as well as the plans and the printable template for the sides. If you want to keep on watching, I'm gonna link you another cool project video over here. See you in the next one.